This is the Neal Hartley Show. And now, coming to you live from Studio A at Control Central, here's Neal Hartley.
All right, thank you, narrator, introductor guy. We're here, and we're here. Greetings from the beautiful mountains of East Tennessee. And you're listening to the Neal Hartley Show, and it's an all-new episode. And I'm glad you're here, man. Lady, whoever you are. No, glad you're here with us, and I'm very excited about this episode, and I'm a little nervous about it as well. This episode is, I think I'm titling it The One About Songwriting. I usually on this show, if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, primarily what I do is I answer questions that people give me, you know, about life, about the Bible, and then what I do is come back and give you a biblical answer. And so that's primarily what we've done. But I talked about it last week that I wanted to do one of these coming up that talked about the music side of things, and that's what I'm going to do today. So I've compiled a list of questions that I've gotten recently or over the years when it comes to making music and specifically about songwriting. And I'm going to delve deep into the archives of my brain, and I'm even going to share some things that I normally just don't share. And so I'm excited to talk about this, and just to kind of give you I don't want to focus too much on me or my background, but more just on the process. And that's really what this one's more about today. So I am glad to be with you and hope you'll stick with us. And if you're listening for the first time, maybe you haven't been into anything we've done, but you're a music person and you're just interested in how things work. And I'm going to share with you kind of how things work, or at least how they've worked for me. I am not what you would call a professional, and so I'm sure that you could ask a dozen different artists and songwriters and studio engineers, and you would get a dozen different answers depending on who it is, and that's okay. So I'm just going to kind of give you my experience and tell you how I come up with things in the songwriting realm. And I hope it'll be interesting to you. So, all right. So we'll get right into it. And I do want to answer a few questions that have to do with me, just to kind of give you a sort of, who are you listening to? What's this guy know about this? And so some of these first questions really are more personal, and then we'll get into some of the more process type stuff. But the first question when it comes to songwriting is just truly, how long have you been writing songs? And so for me, that's an interesting question because I can't really answer it. I've pulled out today, right here on the desk on the console, I've got a one of these zip-up binders, and this thing it's kind of like a little archive for me. It's got a bunch of important stuff to me from the past. I found a newspaper that I guess somebody had given me or I kept from over the years. And this paper was from the Sandersville Progress. I'm originally from Middle Georgia, and our local paper was the Sandersville Progress, and this is the July 14th, 2004 edition. So my new album at the time, my first album at the time, had just released, called Lead On. And what's funny to me about this newspaper, and I guess it's just something to keep me humble, is it has the paper, it has the date and all that, and at the top there's a picture of me, and it has the music section says Hartley releases Lead On page 1B. And so that would take you to that article, and I'm not going to bore you with that article. But the headline, the main top story of the paper, on the day that I made the paper, this is back when we used to read newspapers, guys. I have a physical copy here. The main top headline of the day on Wednesday, July 14th, 2004. Stray goat checks into Clinton motel. And there's a picture of a little goat, and it says under the picture, a maid found this stray goat in a room at the Clinton motel in downtown Sandersville. So you know what? It's good. It's good to be, part of the news like that. But anyway, that's not really answering the question. But in there, I found a bunch of handwritten lyrics from songs I had written from the early 2000s. The earliest lyric that I found in there, I think, dated back to 1998, which means I was 17 or 18 years old when I wrote that song. And And so that's pretty cool. It kind of makes you cringe a little bit when you read that and you say, who wrote that? What kid wrote that? And I think early on, I attempted very hard to be introspective and deep. And, it's always funny to me when you find like a kid like me writing stuff, and I'm trying to write about, all the experiences I've gone through in life. And, people were very sweet and very kind and gracious to me when they would listen and hear me out back then. Knowing what I know now, when they could have said, "You dumb kid, you don't have a clue. You haven't really gone through anything yet." But they didn't do that, and they were very kind. But how long have I been writing? I can remember, I grew up on a farm in Georgia, and I can remember as a kid, and I say this, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble, and I think the statute of limitations is passed on this, but I want to say I was driving a tractor when I was like 9 years old. I could be wrong. But I remember working on that farm as a kid, and that's just what you did. And especially like during summer break, where a lot of kids were doing other stuff. My dad was a farmer, my mom was a nurse, and so we went out on the farm and out to the fields with my dad. We didn't have a babysitter, and three boys around the same age. Probably would have been dangerous to leave us at home. So we would go to the field with my dad. We'd go, if he was working on equipment, we were there with him. If he was out, plowing a field or whatever. I remember as a small kid, he would like come through with the plow, and he would dig up some dirt for us to play in and kind of build, I guess, our version of sandcastles on the edge of the field. And he would just go and he would make his rounds and his runs in these big, massive fields. And he would just kind of keep an eye on us, I guess, and check on us and make sure he could see us. And, that's how we did it. But eventually we were old enough to be trusted to start working on the farm. And I can remember being on these open air tractors. They were International Harvester tractors. And eventually they got some nicer Case International that had the enclosed cab that didn't get dust in your face, and had a radio and speaker system and stuff where you could listen to music. But I remember, at least my early days, you were in the open air cab of a tractor, and even if you had like like a Walkman or something, a little radio with headphones, the noise of just being out there would have been so much that you probably would have had a hard time hearing, listening through even like headphones, and so I remember driving this tractor across a field, and the rhythm of the engine and of the parts and everything moving around, kind of making almost like a drum beat. So I can remember something like something that the engine was doing, and you start kind of humming a song, and you kind of start making up a song just to kind of pass the time away. And then I'd start adding lyrics, and my musical influences at the time, growing up there, primarily, if you were to listen to radio, you got to choose from country and maybe some oldies, and then there was country and maybe a little bit of some light rock. I know there was talk radio, and I didn't care about it at the time. And then there was country, and so I really was influenced a lot by 90s country. And so back in that era, I could probably sing you an entire Alan Jackson album without blinking an eye, because that's just what we had. And so I think the earliest songs that I ever wrote, or I say wrote, made up in my head, I don't think they ever made it to paper, would have been my attempt at country music. And if you will humor me, I'm going to pull up an old guitar here, and I'm going to share something with you, the audience here. Now again, I didn't play guitar back then, and didn't ever write out lyrics or chords or anything. But I remember making up a song, and this was like my big song in my head. And you got to understand that I was a daydreamer, and I would imagine my music career and all the albums and the tours, and I was already working on my greatest hits album in my head. And but this was my big hit single. It was called Country Love. And I'm going to share this with you. Please don't make fun of me. I don't think I could take it, but something like this. So you'd have that tractor, and I would go. Well, I was born on a farm down in Tennille, Georgia. Born in the fall when the leaves come down. Well, I don't know much about my early days, but I do know one sweet sound. I got a country love from the heavens above. Country music is what I love. So don't give me no rap or rock and roll. This country's in my soul. I got a country love. Something like that. Very, very, yeah. But man, that song. All right, enough of that. And I progressed. I eventually, I got into contemporary Christian music, and a lot of my influences were people like Michael W. Smith, Stephen Curtis Chapman, and so and then later on there were singer-songwriter guys like Bebo Norman. Does anybody remember Bebo Norman? And so I remember writing a song, and this one actually did get written down, and it was on like an early kind of mixtape thing I would make of my original songs. And it just give you a little sad taste of the lyrical prowess I had then. And by this point, I'm probably 20 in a dorm room at Bruton Parker College down in Mount Vernon, Georgia. And I would write lyrics like this. I'm sitting here thinking it's late at night. 12 o'clock blinking on my VCR light. If those of you that grew up in that era, we used to have these things called VCRs before DVDs and Blu-rays, and it was a chunky brick of a tape. That's what your movies were on, and VCRs I think were pretty famous around then for if you didn't program them, or if they power went out or anything, it would just blink 12 o'clock. And so I thought I was being cute with 12 o'clock blinking on my VCR. And probably one of the cheesiest lyrics that I ever wrote. And thankfully that song never saw the light of day. And the chorus, it went something like, but all I have is you. All I have is you. All I have is you. So there was some hope in it, but it never progressed any further than that. So I'm going to put that away. Man, that was a long, sad answer, and please be kind to me if you're hearing this and these songs come up. But it was a process, and hopefully over the years things got better. I hope they got better. But yeah, wrote a lot of songs. Somebody asked me, another question here is, how many songs have you written? And I would say, if you count all the bad ones, probably hundreds. I've only done 3 recording projects. I'm working on a 4th, album right now. But most of the stuff I've ever written has never made it to the public. And so, a lot of songs like that and things from the early days. And probably, early on in college, I would make these homemade albums on my friend or my roommate's computer. I didn't even have a computer. And they'd have a recording program on there, and I'd get in there and I would record myself singing it, playing guitar, and then I'd come back in and play other instruments on it and harmonize with myself. And I had these different homemade albums that I circulated and gave away. And so, tons of songs that not very good, but I guess it was part of my process. If you ask me, another question I would get is, what's your favorite song? And my answer that I always give people, I probably heard somebody important say this one time, but you go, well, I can't really answer that because my songs are like my kids. And it's a very special answer that you give there, and it kind of puts you on a pedestal there with how important, and in fact you kind of chicken out from answering the question, because you can say, well, they're all important for different reasons. But I'm sitting here going, well, they're like my kids. They were special at first, and then they were forgotten. No, just kidding. Each of the songs that I wrote over the years, they all had a purpose at the time. And, so they're all special that way. And as far as favorite, I guess I would measure that by the ones that are still relevant today, the ones that people are still listening to. And, I've got songs that I wrote years ago that there's certain churches that still have in their rotation of their worship music. And so, man, I mean, I'm honored by that. It may not be my favorite song to sing or to play, but I'm honored that it got used that way. And then there's some that I wrote that I really enjoyed doing that just nobody really cared about. And, but they're special to me. Obviously, the ones that hold up the best are the ones that the form is good to me. It's just a good, well-written song. And obviously the message is a solid message of a song. So it's hard to answer that question. And I like to turn around and say, what's your favorite song of mine? And most of the time they go, I don't know any of your songs. So anyway, the next question is, have you ever co-written with anybody? Man, that is something that I really wish that I could have done or could do. I'm a bit heavily influenced by people like the Beatles. The Beatles, the core of their songwriting group was Paul McCartney and John Lennon. And if you read up on these guys, they would talk about how they would sit, eye to eye and nose to nose with their guitars facing each other, and they would work on a song, and one guy would start a lyric and the other would finish it, and they would challenge each other to do better and to do better. And they put out some amazing material in the short time that they existed as a group. And of course, the Beatles broke up, and these guys went off and did solo stuff. And their solo stuff was good, but it never really, for most people's taste anyway, never really met the standard of the original stuff they did together. And I think part of that was they challenged each other. They really did. So you hear some of the early Paul McCartney solo stuff, and it's okay, but there's some silliness to it, and there's probably just some, you listen, you go, hey, you kind of chickened out on that one. And that's where John would have probably said, no, do this. Or John was a little too weird and a little too trying to be too edgy, and Paul would have brought him back in and said, no, how about let's go back to I Love You Girl now, whatever. And I'm sure there were other things that influenced them, substances and things they got into. And, I don't endorse their lifestyle, but it was an incredible thing they had as songwriters. And all that to say, it's one of those things that I've always wanted to do is co-write with somebody. I tried it, I tried it one time in college and with another guy that we were trying to write a song for a friend of ours that was moving away. And, I think what he wrote was good, and I think what I wrote was good. But when you listen to the song, it literally sounded like two different songs. His stuff was very thoughtful and poetic, and mine was more melodic and we're gonna miss you, whatever. And it sounded like two songs trying to cram up next to each other. And so, I'm very shy by nature, especially with my music. You would think, people like me would sit around and jam all the time on the guitar and say, hey, listen to this new song I just came up with. But I'm very protective of it and very secretive almost with it until I'm ready to share it. And so my wife, who is very supportive and wants to hear the process, a lot of times I'm like, oh, hold on, I'm not quite ready for you to hear it. And I've gotten better over the years, 13 years of marriage. Hopefully she would say that I've gotten better at kind of sharing more of the process with her now. But it's taken me some time. And so maybe that's part of why I've never done well with co-writing, is because kind of letting somebody into my world right there is kind of hard to do. So, all right, well, a lot of that was just personal stuff to kind of give you the context. But the big question that I get is, how do you write a song? And I'll just start out by saying, I think that's a difficult answer because it's different and it's unique for everybody. You could talk to a dozen different artists, songwriters, and you would get a dozen different, takes on that process. And, some guys begin with music. They write out scores of music and then they go back and put lyrics to it. Some start with words. Some start with an idea. There's been guys who will just take, something they heard somebody say and they'll write a song about it. Or they'll start out with a title. They'll say, I'll name a song this. Now I'm going to write the song. And, so everybody's unique and different on that. There are songwriting teams, like I mentioned, but there's some that this guy writes the lyrics, this guy writes the music, and that's how they do it. And so there's a lot of different ways. For me, I usually start more with an idea or a concept. What do you want to write the song about? Or somebody says, write a song for me about this. And what that does is it sort of tightens that circle. So you got a big circle surrounding all the different stuff you could write a song about. And it narrows in, tightens in that circle, and gives you some focus and brings all those thoughts within that circle and allows you to, kind of piece together that. So for me, I start with the idea or the concept. And then really, I'm a lyrical person. So, what's the song going to say? What am I going to say in the song? And then, start some lyrical stuff. Then, for me, the music comes because the music kind of matches the mood of the lyrics. If it's a song that's praising God and exciting, then the music's probably going to be more upbeat. But if it's more introspective or more, confessional or whatever, it's probably going to be softer. It's probably going to be maybe even a minor key. And so for me, the music kind of matches where you're going with the lyric and with the idea and the concept. And so that's how I kind of work most of the time. I've broken that rule from time to time where I'll figure something out on a guitar or a piano and like what I did, and then I kind of go back and fit a lyric into that. I've certainly done that, but for me, that's mostly how I do it. I'm a worship pastor at a church, so there's been times where in the past our pastor would do a sermon series, and I would start, I'd be sitting there in church and I would hear, in the message something that just spoke to me, and I would write it down. Normally somebody may be writing their sermon notes. I'm writing lyrics down, and I can hear the song. And this is where it's weird for me to explain, but when a song comes to me, a lot of times I hear a fully produced, full band, full vocal, harmonies, even a choir sometimes kind of coming in at the end. I hear all that. I even hear other artists do my songs. I've got a song back from the early 2000s, my first album, called All These Things. And that song is one that still gets sung in various churches. It's one that Lifeway picked up and used on a compilation album for their Fuge worship camps back in I think it was 2005 or 6 that album would have come out. And but when I wrote that song, I heard Mac Powell's voice. I heard Third Day doing that song. And there's been others over the years that I could tell you, go down the list and say, I hear this guy doing this song. Make Your Name Known on my last album, Sinners and Saints, I could hear Stephen Curtis Chapman singing that. Or I've got a new one coming out on this new album. I've got a song called Only For You. And initially I heard the voice of Bear from Need to Breathe singing that lyric. And so sometimes for me, it's just the style. Like if I were going to write a song for Third Day, or if I was going to write a song for, whoever the group is, and it kind of allows you to sort of come at it from a different angle. Anyway, that's kind of how I work, and my process kind of, adapts from time to time on that stuff. One thing for me with songwriting is I just think it's good to do it on a regular basis, even if you don't really have a reason to write. I remember early on in my marriage, Amy and I were married, and I was working at a hat factory in Mobile, Alabama, and I wasn't serving on staff at a church, really wasn't even leading in anything. I was just a member of a church working at a hat factory, and I had this one album that I'd put out, and I was just longing to do more musically, but it really had no avenue at the time, and really even all this the ways of doing these things online and YouTube and all that, it was still kind of new and unknown at that time. And I remember writing songs and going, well, I don't know who this is for, but I'm just writing it like I'm writing it for a record. And I just had to do that. There's been times where just for exercise, I'll write a song about something fun or silly. I love to do that with my kids now. I'll make up a song just for their entertainment purposes. I got a friend who's got an interesting kind of ska band over in North Carolina, and he contacted me one day and said, hey, could you write me a song about Arby's? I said, Arby's? You mean like the restaurant with the roast beef sandwiches and the curly fries? And yeah, could you write a song about Arby's? And so I wrote a song that's called, I think it's called The Legend of Arby's. And it's out there. They've done it, and they did a really fun kind of ska punk version of it. Not something that I necessarily want on my resume, but I was proud of that. I was proud to be able to come up with something that worked for them, and also just, kind of keep myself sharp. So the songwriting process for me is mysterious. And I've heard secular guys say this. I've heard people like Sting or Paul Simon talk about how it feels like the song kind of comes out of nowhere, and then when you're done, it's just, you're used up. You kind of, I feel like this. I say, man, I don't think I could ever write another song. That's all I got. The tank is empty. And then over time, it kind of comes back, and you have an idea for something new. And, it's just, my belief in that is that it comes from the fact that we are made in the image of the ultimate artist and the ultimate creator, God. Even secular musicians who don't even believe in God, humanity is made in the image of God. And so we are creative. We have people who make things and design things and invent things. And I think even the people that don't know God, don't give him any credit for it, they get that basic ability, I believe, that kind of stems from being made in the image of God. And so I give that credit to him, to God, that he gives me that. I'm very careful not to ever say, when somebody says, hey, great song, to say, the Lord gave me this song, because I've heard people say that, and I'm like, it wasn't a really good song. I wouldn't blame that on God. And so, I try to be careful with that. I do think God gives us things and gives us songs, but let's be honest. If God writes a song, it's going to be perfect, and there won't be any issues with it, and it would be number one forever. But I do think he gives us these giftings of ideas and creativity in songs. And, so for me, I'll get an idea, and a lot of times I'll just kind of hum out the idea, hum out the lyrics. I use technology. I've got an iPhone, and I'm not endorsing them here, but, on every iPhone, as far as I know, you've got a Notes app and you've got a Voice Memos app. And so in the Notes app, that's where a lot of times I'll write a lyric out for a song. I'll even kind of put verses and choruses, space them out. And then in the Voice Memos, I'm able to go in and sing a demo of it, or sometimes you set the phone down and pull the guitar out and play it. So I got an album coming out called Known, a worship album. I have a note on my phone. I'm going to play you a little bit of it. And this is from October of 2016. And this was a demo I did for that song. I think I probably even wrote it earlier than that, but here's a demo, a little bit and piece of it, and you'll see what I mean. So, hold on. So there you go. It's me. So anyway, you get the idea there. Voice demo of that, and so and then there's apps out there. There's a harmony app that I found the other day, and I was really excited to get it. Let me find. It's called Audio Bridge, and so with it, I'm gonna have a hard time finding this right here. Okay, here we go. On Audio Bridge the other day, I harmonized with myself. Oh, darling, you are my loving girl. Oh, darling, you are my loving girl. And that's nothing more than just an idea for something that I was really just playing around with the app. But it gives you a way to get creative with all of that. And so, maybe it's a resource somebody out there can use. So final project here, later on, you take the songs and you go to the studio. And that's kind of what I want to talk about for the remaining time of the show today is, this week, actually this Saturday, I'm going to be traveling over to North Carolina to continue the process of this new album. And so just to kind of give you like a rundown of how that process worked, probably a little over a year ago, I started contacting studio musicians and everything, and I had raised the money to make the album. It costs money. It does. And so I did some fundraising and raised the money to start. And long story short, because of scheduling and everything, we couldn't get into the studio until August. And part of that is because I have been blessed to be surrounded by some amazing studio musicians who, they play in the big leagues. They play with some major names that you would know, and but they also have a servant's heart, I guess, and they are willing to play on little dinky projects like mine. But anyway, got these guys. So, I got a guy, Will McFarlane, and some of you will know that name, and those of you that don't, Google him. You'll find that this guy, he toured for years with Bonnie Raitt, a guitar player. He's part of the Muscle Shoals rhythm section, the Swampers. There's a lyric in the song Sweet Home Alabama. It says, in Muscle Shoals, they have the Swampers. They've been known to pick a song or two. That's him. That's who that's talking about. And he's played with everybody. And so, I think a few weeks or months before we're in the studio together, he did a track with Kiefer Sutherland, stinking Jack Bauer, doing a song with him. And then I think after we got done this past time, one of the next projects he worked on was with Nick Jonas. And so I'm very, very touched and honored that I get to work with some of these guys. And but anyway, we got together probably around August, and I sent them demos like you just heard, like of Known, that song, and they track it out and everything. They chart it out. And then we got to the studio, we tracked it in a day, and I sang a fake vocal along with their real tracks. I came back later, and then I tracked my real vocals. Come back later, and I returned that time with my sister Audra, who's an amazing vocalist, and we sang harmonies and background vocals that day. Different times, there was a guy that played some saxophone on it. There's a guy that came in and did tracks of keyboards and strings for all the songs. Going back Saturday to add some other vocals and some claps and some stuff like that. And so the process is pretty cool. It stretches out. And when you're done with all the tracking, this engineer will get in there and he'll mix it all together. He'll balance out everything. You don't use everything you record. There's some stuff that'll get cut. But you come down to, here's the versions of the songs that we want. And then it's mastered. And then it's sent off to the distribution companies, and it gets out there with places like iTunes and Spotify and all these different things. And physical albums will show up, and you release the album. And for me, for this one, the goal is to use it as a resource for worship leaders like myself. So obviously, I'd love for these songs to take off and get played and get radio airtime and all that. But ultimately, I just want them to be used for the kingdom and used for God's glory. And I don't care if anybody ever hears my name from it. But what an honor it'd be if even one of these songs is used in the worship of God in the church. And so that's my goal with this one, and I'm excited about sharing it and doing that as a resource. So that's kind of how that process works. Just for fun, I'm gonna play you. This is a unmixed, unmastered version of that song "Known" that I played you earlier of the demo. So and again, it's a rough, but you'll kind of get an idea of where things are headed with this. So here's "Known." And so, obviously, this is still rough, and also that was playing off the speakers of my iPhone. But you get the idea. There's a process there where that came from just sitting in a sermon or listening to the pastor say, we're doing a series called "Known." It's about knowing God. To going through my process then of taking that idea and that concept and putting it together into a song about wanting to know God and be known by God and make God known to people so that they can go and repeat that process. It's discipleship's what it is. And sending that demo, that earlier version I played you, to the point where here we are now with this, and it gets out there. And so, it's an exciting process. This is 30 something minutes of bore for some of you, but maybe it's interesting to somebody else out there. I would just say if there's anybody out there that is, musically gifted, or you have some of these tendencies, I want to encourage you to use these abilities the Lord has given you. And you may be like, man, I can't do, whatever. I can't do it to a certain level. That doesn't matter. Still do it. And I'm so thankful for the process that I've gone through. When I was in college, especially early on in college, my plan was to be signed by a major record label and to probably drop out and have to finish classes later because I was going to be so busy with touring and, all that stuff and recording new albums. And early on in college, I would make these homemade CDs, I think I mentioned earlier, and I sent all these demos out to all these major record labels. And so many of them didn't respond at all, but many of them I would get that fateful letter that came back that said, Neal, thanks, but we can't use you right now. There were some that were more encouraging that just said, keep doing what you're doing. I was a big fan of I said Michael W. Smith earlier. He started a Christian record label in the late 90s called Rocketown Records. And one of the first artists that they really pushed on that label was a guy named Chris Rice, an amazing singer-songwriter, kind of had a James Taylor sound with his guitar and piano sounds, and loved his stuff. I memorized everything he put out, and people said, hey, you kind of sound like Chris. You kind of sound like Chris Rice. And so I, obviously sent them stuff thinking, hey, Rocketown, you're going to love it. Here's another Chris Rice. And Rocketown did not care for it. They sent me a letter and they said, Neal, keep doing what you're doing and just use your gifts where you are. And I was so deflated over that. I used to take these rejection letters and I would tape them up to my dorm room wall, called it the Wall of Shame. And I remember, my wife later, she's like, that's kind of morbid. Don't do that, And in fact, I've got some of those rejection letters in my archives here. And I'm just, I guess what I'm saying is I'm thankful it didn't happen. I'm thankful it didn't happen. And what I learned later was, these companies, it's an industry, it's a business, and they want to invest in people that are already successful in doing it where they are. And they wanted to see somebody who was out there using that music any way I could. And really, I couldn't show them any of that. I was a guy in his dorm room kind of making music and not really sharing it and using it for the kingdom at all. And long story short, years later, I'm in Nashville applying for a job with Lifeway with their Fuge camps. And I was there for like a weekend and was at a church outside of Nashville in the Brentwood area. And they said, are you going to stick around for the weekend? I said, yeah. My mom and I were actually there together and said, we're going to try to go to church somewhere. And they suggested, hey, check out, there's a little church that meets in a YMCA gym down here in Franklin. And so we went, and the worship leader, the worship pastor, and actually one of the founding pastors of this church turned out to be my musical hero, Michael W. Smith. There he is. He's at a keyboard set up with folding chairs in a gym, and there's probably like 50 people there for church. And we were there for the service, and then when it was over, as they did what many of us in ministry have done for years since then, hey, can anybody stick around and help us put up the chairs? And of course I volunteered, and I spent the next maybe 15, 20 minutes with one of my musical heroes taking folding chairs and putting them in a closet. And it was such an amazing experience. We had a great conversation as we're doing it. He said, where are you from? What you doing? And I shared with him. I shared, what I was hoping to do, where I felt like God was giving me an ability. And I remember him saying, Neal, can I pray for you? And there, again, my musical hero. And as I'm saying this, I look over and there's a picture of him and I together on my desk over here. And people see that all the time. Probably don't have a clue who either of us are, because I don't know that I look like me very much. He looks more like him. But I remember standing in that parking lot of that church, and he prayed. And he didn't pray, God, give Neal a successful recording career or make him a household name. It was really a prayer of, God, let your will be done in Neal's life. Use him where you want to use him. And I remember Michael praying specifically, Lord, if that's global, then take him globally. But if it's local and regionally, then use him there. And I remember being so humbled by that. And it really stuck with me. And so to this day, I look at the path that God's taken me on, and I've gotten to do all this stuff I just shared with you. And but I've also gotten to plug into the local church for a number of years, ever since, I guess the last 12 or 13 years now. And that's exactly where God wanted me. It's exactly what He wanted me to do. He also allowed me to get to do the artist thing and the album thing. I get to go and do concerts and events. I get to be on radio every so often, and I get to open for artists, and I'm on iTunes. I do all that, and that stuff is that's sweet extra that I didn't deserve, but it's been really cool. And I just say that for all of us, whether you're musical or you're not, whatever it is that He's gifted you with, be obedient with it, and trust Him to use what He's given to you to His glory, whatever that may look like. And so I'm at peace with that, and I'm excited about where God's allowed me to go and what He's allowed me to do. I'm excited about the future, and my heart really is, I want to be used for His glory. People are going to forget my name, and that's good. I want to make His name known, and I'd be honored to be a part of that process with the music that He has given me. And so that's where I am on that. And this may be a podcast that nobody ever listens to but me, but it is the one about music. It's the one about songwriting. And if any of you guys have any more questions about that, obviously you can email me, nealhartleyradio@gmail.com. That's NEALHARTLEY, nealhartleyradio@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @TheNealHartley, and I would love to follow up with you and share more with you, or give you more answers to things like that. But I would just ask you as we close today to be continuing to pray for this process, for this album, and how the Lord's going to use it. And thank you for bearing with me today and for listening to this. And look forward to being with you next time and answering some more questions. Keep them coming in, and we'll keep on going with it. So thank you so much. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you next time.